And one other very important piece to this is that the distribution of men is not just a flat straight line like this, like basically everything else. It's a bell curve. And there's this big middle piece where most men are still encouraging offenders to offend through their action or inaction. They are explicitly or implicitly encouraging men who do commit violence to continue to commit violence.
Just taking a little walk and thought I'd finally go ahead and talk about this in depth. I don't like how the guy in that original video, Stitch, says the way women see it. He says it several times. And I don't like that because the way that we see it is actually the way Yah sees it too, according to scripture. He sets up the truth in that video to sound like it's really just women's personal opinions. And I've actually been meditating on this for some months now, just like ruminating over how to say it and make sure that I was biblically sound in my thinking. I've been checking my own heart first, examining my own thoughts, because the word is supposed to be sharper than any two-edged sword, right? And I finally think I'm at a place where I have enough clarity and scripture, rightly divided scripture, to go ahead and share some thoughts here. You'll notice the title on screen for this video is a quote that says, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." I have observed that most men fall right in that middle of that bell curve, the image that you saw in the Stitch video. They fall right in the middle because they're not egregiously violent against women and children, but they're not righteous either, according to scripture. These types of men are passive, silent. They're selective conviction. It's lukewarm. And Yah said, "I know your works, that you're neither hot nor cold." So I wish that you were hot or cold. But because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will vomit you out of my mouth. That's Revelation 3:15 to 16. And I want to go back and mention what I meant by selective conviction. A lot of men, they only speak up when they disagree with women's issues. They will debate all day long and fight for their own rights when it's just concerning men's stuff, but they go silent when it's about protecting women and children. These types of men, they don't speak up to correct other men or to challenge injustice. They only care about women's issues when they disagree. Even the fact, I was thinking too, just the fact that when I was writing this and when we discuss issues, we always have to add the disclaimer, not all men. It proves my point. We're bullied, harangued by those good men on the internet. We always are on the defense, which just shows how big that middle group is. They're not just a few isolated men, they're the majority. That's why their voice is so loud, their influence is so strong. This median group in the bell curve of so-called good men, the nice guys, the benevolent patriarchs, they make up the largest part of the bell curve because they outnumber everybody else. Their collective silence and defensiveness carries weight and authority. They only come out to protest their public image, though. They always are protesting their image as good men instead of protesting actual injustice. They don't defend the oppressed and advocate for justice. They're really out here just to defend their ego. Imagine if this middle group in the bell curve would use their voice and their influence, that big majority influence toward what Yah actually commanded them to defend. So this is exactly what Revelation 21:8 calls out. The first people designated for the lake of fire are not the violent ones. It says the cowardly. That's who's listed first. That's what these so-called good men represent. The men I'm describing are the cowards in Revelation 21:8 because they're not out here murdering. They're not putting women into hospitals with domestic violence, and they're not molesting children and stuff like that. None of that big violent stuff. But they shrink back. They see the wrong and say nothing and hide behind peace or objectivity. In other words, according to scripture, they dress the wound of my people with carelessness. very little care, crying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. That's Jeremiah 6 and 14. It's also mentioned Jeremiah 8 and 11. But back to the original passage I mentioned in Revelation 21. If you look at verse 7, right before this, Yah first promises that the one who overcomes will inherit all things. And I will be his Elohim, and he will be my son. That's what he said. So the opposite of cowardice is an overcomer. Someone who stands firm and obeys even when it's uncomfortable, right? So as this made me think of Romans 12 and 21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. That's not happening. The word cowardly is not about people who just feel fear. Everybody feels fear, like obviously. It's about people who shrink back, people who let fear stop them from doing what Yah told them to do. They're the ones who silence the Ruach HaKodesh, or the set-apart spirit, when he prompts them to speak. 2 Timothy 1 and 7, and also see Ezekiel 3, verses 18 to 19. Cowardice is not harmless. It's actually betrayal and a form of abandonment. Ezekiel chapter 3 and chapter 33 both warn us that if a watchman sees danger coming and doesn't speak, the blood is on his hands. That's exactly what these passive men are doing, watching destruction unfold and saying nothing. Psychologists call this the bystander effect, but scripture calls that a watchman with blood on his hands. Cowardice is choosing peace with the people over choosing peace with Yah. It's protecting men instead of protecting Yah's truth and his laws, particularly when they are holding men accountable. Yahushua said that anyone who's not willing to leave brother, sister, or friend, and so on for his sake, is not even worthy of him. That's Matthew 19:29, and we also see it in Luke 14:26. It is loyalty to the brotherhood over righteousness, protecting their egos over taking action upon their convictions. That's the sin. That's the sin that these so-called good men are demonstrating. And so, like, even though they're not violent themselves, they're not the murderers, idolaters, and sorcerers that are mentioned in that verse, Revelation 21, verse 8. They still enable the violence by refusing to confront it. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's obedience in spite of your fears. Joshua 1 and 9. If the men in the orange and yellow portion of that bell curve image were really surrendered to the Spirit, they would hear the Spirit's correction and conviction. They'd respond to it. They would see these weightier matters of the law when they read the scriptures and then recognize them in the world, and they would take action. Matthew 23:23. But instead, these men tend to read scripture like just historians and geographers, not sons of Elohim who are really led, surrendered to, and led by his Spirit. Romans 8 and 14. They know the book. They don't know the author, though. Their faith is shallow, and it lacks this relational intimacy that's required to actually be in an authentic covenant with the Most High Yahuah. You cannot be a man after Yah's own heart when you have not even surrendered your own heart to him. And you know that reference is from 1 Samuel 13:14. When you refuse to feel your emotions and confess your faults, you actually block the very process that's meant to make you whole. Whole in the Spirit and whole in Yahuah. Those emotions are designed to lead us right back to Yah, to bring our weakness to him in prayer so that his strength can be made perfect in us. But instead, most people try to handle life in their own understanding and their own strength. Proverbs 3:5-6, right? We're commanded not to do that very thing. They don't decrease so that Yahuah can increase in them. John 3 and 30. So most men, unfortunately, are being taught to be emotionally unavailable. We know this. The average household starts to teach young men to suppress their emotions right around middle school age. That's when we start to see boys hazing one another, shaming one another, and like developing certain misogynistic ideologies. They're growing up in households that literally are telling them, repress your emotions. And frankly, the same happens to a lot of girls too. Shut up before I give you something to cry about. Quit crying. Stop crying. The boys don't cry. Patriarchy has effectively trained men not to express their emotions, their feelings, which are the very thing that connects us to Yah's spirit. Literally, emotional availability is required for spiritual availability. All you got to do is zoom out and look at the scriptures to see it. Every prophet who walked with Yah was emotionally honest and vulnerable. David wept and worshiped. Jeremiah lamented. Paul got frustrated plenty of times throughout the scriptures. Even Yahuah cried and flipped tables. And then, like, hello, there's an entire book called Lamentations. It's literally about weeping. So when men are being trained not to express their emotions, they're literally being raised up to avoid the spirit. They're being trained to harden their hearts. The very thing that scripture warns against over and over and over again. And then we act surprised when they grow up spiritually dry, like disconnected, detached, and hard-hearted. But of course, that's what happens when you raise men to ignore the very things that Yah instilled in us that would trigger conviction. They're being raised to silence their emotions and being raised to measure themselves against other men instead of Yah's word. To worship the opinions of other men instead of Yah's word. And we can't fix what we refuse to face, y'all. We cannot heal what we refuse to feel. So until men stop comparing themselves to other men in society and actually start comparing themselves to Yah's standard in his word, they're going to keep playing themselves into believing that they are good when they're actually headed for the lake of fire, according to Revelation 21:8. One other thing I wanted to mention. I want to make sure I say that everything I just said about these men, this big group of men in the bell curve, it applies to plenty of women as well. There's definitely women in that bell curve who participate in the deception, and they amplify these false narratives too. And you can see those women, described in Isaiah 3:12 and Ezekiel 13, verse 17 to 19. You know what's really sad about this though? The most tragic part is really how many watchmen have abandoned their post in the kingdom. What it has done is created this broader failure of all the benevolent patriarchs, these good men, these nice guys who consider themselves like spiritual leaders and teachers. Their failure to teach the whole truth that brings about justice and freedom, that would bind up the brokenhearted and restore beauty for ashes. Their failure to actually take action and speak up for the oppressed, as Yah's word commands in several scriptures, has left a void that's now being filled all across social media and podcasts by counterfeit teachers who are feeding people a polluted truth. People are left piecing together scraps of the truth from places like the Eggs and Grits podcast, for example, which is full of black folks who, even as of the last 7 days, have been going to war against Yah's word, discrediting the scriptures, and in doing so, they're really smearing Yah's name and don't even know it. Then we got voices like Shira 7 on the women's side, trying to teach women to just focus on getting money, get that paper. She's training women to develop a hardened heart too. And the problem is, while I can acknowledge that we're all made in Yah's image, which means they all reflect some part of his truth, for sure. Like, I can really appreciate a lot of the things that they say. But the problem is, these kinds of people don't reflect the whole truth. They don't reflect the whole truth either. So they're like the other side of false doctrine, really doing the same thing as a lot of these spiritual leaders are. They're only delivering partial truths. So it's the same problem. It's like they're giving you water, but it's still laced with cyanide. It's still got some poison in it. So they're leading people astray too, encouraging them down a path of hardness of heart and stiff-necked rebellion. Just leading the sheep right to the slaughter, right back to the same behaviors that actually got us exiled and scattered to the four corners of the earth in the first place. Yahusha said, many will say to me in that day, Master, Master, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I shall declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. That's Matthew 7:22 to 23.